So the evolution of the rates market has been incredibly volatile, and the level of rates now, with mortgage rates approaching 8% as we kind of headed down here for this conference, has led to a whole lot of questions with respect to where is housing headed from here. I think we have to think of this in terms of both the short term and the longer term impacts if mortgage rates were to stay at or above 8%. From a short term perspective, and when we think about the US housing market, we try to synthesize all of this through what we call our 4-pillar framework. The first pillar is demand, and by that we mean household formations. The marginal demand for shelter. It can be ownership or rentership shelter. That's largely going to be a demographic-based forecast. And so we think of that more as kind of the underlying tide of the US housing market. It's not going to change on a dime. It's going to be kind of with us for the next 2, 5, 10 years. The other 3 pillars are more of those shorter-term dials. They determine how quickly those households are formed. They determine if those households can be formed as ownership households, if more of them are going to be renter households. And those 3 pillars are supply, which is existing listings, new builds, and kind of your distress, your foreclosures, if you will. The 3rd pillar is affordability, if we're talking about mortgage rates. And the 4th pillar is credit availability. Can people actually qualify to get a mortgage? What type of borrowers are we underwriting? When we think about what we've seen in the immediate future from this move to 8%, it's been a resetting of inventory levels. We hit lows kind of in the second quarter of 2022, a little bit of expansion in supply over the course of the past year, and now rates have really started moving higher. We're moving in the other direction. Supply is retrenching. Home builder confidence has come down 3 months in a row. We think the immediate impact of that is going to be upward pressure on home prices. Our base case for the end of the year was 0%. We thought that our bull case was +5. We're guiding towards that number now. But we're already in October. The end of the year is pretty close. When we think about next year, if rates were to stay here, you mentioned affordability. The rate at which affordability is going to be deteriorating because of how resilient home prices have been with an 8% mortgage rate, we're now going to be back to a level of deterioration that we haven't really seen in the 30 to 40 years worth of data that we have. 2022 notwithstanding. What we think that's going to do is really impact the demand side of the equation here. Now, 2022 was characterized by an incredible amount of affordability deterioration, but homeowners with these locked-in 30-year fixed-rate mortgages, they didn't need to sell. And so home prices were very, very protected. Now, we could see that same case play out. These are 30-year fixed-rate mortgages in most instances. You still have an incredible lock-in effect. The effective mortgage rate for outstanding mortgages in the country is about 3.7% right now, with prevailing at 8%. A lot of homeowners are going to be incentivized to stay there. But what we think was going to happen here is you're not going to see the same significant drops in activity. And by that we mean housing starts, we mean home sales. And the reason you're not going to see that is because if we look at the outstanding balance of mortgage rates, there just aren't a lot of borrowers that are falling out of the money when we move from 6.5% to 8%. When we went from 3 to 7, you were moving away from a bulk of the originated mortgages, and that had a really material effect. There is also a level of transactions that have to happen, regardless of whether or not the homeowner is economically incentivized or interest rate incentivized to do so. And if we look at the total number of single unit transactions, and we take that as a percentage of the owned stock of housing, we're pretty much at the lows from the great financial crisis already. That doesn't mean we can't fall a little bit from here, but we don't think that you're going to see those very sharp declines that characterized 2022. We would say that if mortgage rates were to stay here, it effectively puts a cap or a lid on sales and starts really being able to climb from where they are right now. From a home price perspective, prices have been very protected, but now if you have this on the demand side, you become incredibly reliant on inventories staying at record lows. And we do think that there's going to have to be some give from an inventory perspective, right? Just like sales are kind of at that turnover level, we think inventories are close as well. If demand doesn't increase next year because rates are here, and if you start to see just a little bit of a give in inventories, one hypothetical scenario we ran was just a 5% increase. But we were seeing more than that in the second half of 2022. If you were to see a 5% increase, home prices would be down. Our estimate would round to 5% if we go through our model there. So that's kind of how we're thinking about everything that you just discussed with respect to the housing market if rates were to stay at these levels. Sure. I think there are a whole lot of trends worth discussing in the RMBS sector. If we're thinking about single family versus multifamily, one of the points when we talk about housing, just kind of broadly, is the fact that there has been a structural shortage of supply in the US housing market. And when we think about the chain of adding at least new homes or new units, new buildings to the housing sector, we think about it in terms of, well, there's building permits, there's housing starts. Those are kind of the numbers that a lot of people grab and talk about. And then before you have a completed unit, you're under construction. And I think one of the talking points that people have really gravitated towards recently has been the fact that the under construction numbers, build timelines, both in the single unit side and the multi-unit side, the apartment side, have really elongated during the pandemic. And the under construction number has, let's just say it's pretty significantly elevated versus the number of units that have been started. But where we think you have to dig in there is the delineation or the differentiation between the single unit housing market and the multi-unit housing market. Yes, there's a backlog in single unit homes under construction, but single unit starts from cycle peak in kind of the April-May 2022 timeframe, they're down over 20%. And that's allowed some of that backlog to clear. We didn't come anywhere close to the peak number of units certainly started, but even the under construction backlog, units under construction never got within 15 or 16% of the peak prior to the great financial crisis. And they've come down almost 20% from that local peak in the middle of 2022. 5+ unit homes under construction, it is a very different story. We have this data going back over 60 years at this point, or almost 60 years. We have never had more 5+ unit homes under construction than we have right now. It is exceeding the peaks that we saw. The peaks for that time series are in the 1970s and 1980s. It's 120% higher than where we were in the years prior to the great financial crisis. So when we think about the evolution there, there's a lot more supply that is poised to come online in the multifamily sector, whereas single family homes, this hits to the supply point we talk about in the housing market, but it also, we think, is a fundamental support, a fundamental tailwind for the single family rental space. You just don't have that same supply. And if rent growth is a function at a very basic level of demand and supply, the supply dynamics are very different in single family versus multifamily. And that's something that has been coming up a fair amount in our meetings here at ABS East.